Welcome to Inspired Artist Podcast with me, Porter Singer. I am speaking with Dave Stringer today, who is a Grammy-nominated producer, musician, and songwriter who has been widely profiled as one of the most innovative artists of the modern yoga movement. He's both an inspiring singer and a compelling public speaker, resolving neuroscience, yoga philosophy, and art into a participatory theatrical experience. I can vouch for that because I've been to many of his live shows and they're incredible. He is featured in the documentary film Mantras, Sound into Silence, which I saw. That was awesome. Maybe we can talk about that. And The Power of Mantra, and has toured extensively, leading concerts, workshops, and retreats all over the world. Welcome.
It's great to be here, Porter.
So let's start there. Actually, that's really fun. I forgot about that movie, Sounds into Silence. Yeah. What was that like?
Well, it's funny. I almost wasn't in it, and but what happened is I had been in a conversation with the director, and she was like, "Well, we're really done filming," but we started talking about the neuroscience of kirtan, and I was in the process of working on a research proposal with a neuroscientist named Andrew Newberg. And she wanted to interview him, and the plot thickened. And she realized that actually that was a whole other way of looking at devotional singing that wasn't examined in the film. So it actually got turned into kind of a major chunk of it because it was another perspective on what's happening here. It's a funny thing, this devotional music scene, because a lot of people are coming at it from a lot of different directions. And when people use the word bhakti, for example, I kind of want to know what they mean by that. Like what was their path to it? I'm not trying to discredit anybody's experience, but I find that for myself, I'm a committed agnostic, which makes me an unusual bhakti in that sense, because
Okay.
my position is I don't know, you know.
Uh-huh.
and but
Is that what agnostic means?
yeah,
Just like
not
willing to think on it?
gnosis means to know, and against, not know. So
Gotcha. Okay.
and to me, like, that's what the process of yoga actually is. It's not a belief system, it's a process of inquiry,
Gotcha. Yeah.
so for me, it starts as a process of inquiry into, like, how does this stuff work? If I don't believe in it or know anything about it, or if you come to a chant that I'm leading or you're leading or anyone's leading and no one gives you any info, and you end up having a great experience, well, how come? There must be something else going on here.
hmm
Um, and even within the yoga world itself, there's so many different ideas about what we mean by consciousness or God. It seems better position for me as an artist to take this position that I don't know. I'm really interested. I want to ask questions, and maybe this practice is a way of answering those questions for myself, or at least leading me toward something like an answer.
That's so interesting. What do you feel is like the flip side of that? Like when you say I'm like that's not a really popular position to take. What do you see as like the popular position to take, I guess?
I guess the popular position seems to be one of, oh, just sing and everything will come to you. Like, that's all you need to know. And on one
Mm,
hand, to cultivate ecstasy in yourself, yeah, that certainly changes your relationship to other people and to the world. I really appreciate, like, the initial bhakti position that there shouldn't be any mediator between, like, the singer and the divine, however you see it, that we're trying to create a direct experience. That's powerful for me. The question is, though, is that I think a lot of people's position is we're singing names of God, and that it implies belief in God. And
mm,
and when we get to that, I have to say, well, what do you mean by God? First of all, like, what's that to you? And everybody's going to answer differently. Um, and so, but the thing I'm a little uncomfortable with is sometimes I think people are trying to turn this all into a new religion. And yet I see this as a path of leading us away from the dogma and division of religion into something more authentically connective and spiritual.
Hmm. So is your interest in the neuroscience, is that based in some like path that you took previously? I don't remember reading about that. I remember reading that you had been a videographer, but are you like a scientist at heart?
Well, I'm married to a philosopher, and we're neuroscience
Okay.
geeks. But no, I mean, I would say that that's part of my. I've always found the metaphors of science really interesting, and in the songs that I write in English, the poetry is sort of inspired by some of those that imagery. I'm also the son of a physician, so like my family
Hmm.
has a scientific background. Um, and I'm sort of a refugee from various different religious movements, beginning with like, essentially fundamental Christianity and,
Ah,
and then, time with the guru and everything. So, I mean, I'm making a lot of linkages between a lot of things. But to specifically answer your question, how did the neuroscience thing get started? When I was first in India chanting, I went there not because I was seeking anything. I went because I was hired to make videos for a particular guru in India. And they deliberately didn't tell me anything about what was going on because what I was supposed to do was make a series of videos for beginners about Eastern philosophy. And their brilliant idea was to hire a beginner and
hmm.
have it all be through my lens, right? So they were asking me to engage in an act of discovery. And it opened from there. So I'm having this amazing experience chanting, and I wanted to know why. Because I wasn't trying to get something from it. It was happening. And from what I know, and from what I'd already been interested in asking about like how consciousness worked, because it's not like I didn't have these questions.
Hmm.
Um, I knew something at the time that there were neuroscientific processes involved. This was in the 1990s. A lot of other research has happened between now and then. Um, but I wanted to see if we could explain it in terms of physiological processes. Um, in the same way, I think there's been a search for a physiological or chemical, neurochemical origin of consciousness itself, um, which more on that subject, presently.
Is there something that like you feel compelled to share, or like something that surprised you about that element
Well,
of all this?
um, I think like many people, and my wife would dispute this because she's a little bit more of a physicalist in this sense. We have been looking, the search for the origin of consciousness animates like all of the yoga movement for,
Hmm.
thousands of years. And science keeps looking for a neurochemical origin of it. Like how do all these connections produce a sense of self and a sense of, you know, the divine? How do we feel love? What processes bring that about? Um, no one has explained it yet.
Hmm.
And I mean, thousands of years we have not been able to explain how consciousness arises. Um, what I find interesting right now is that there's a movement in philosophy, and particularly there's a Australian philosopher, David Chalmers is his name. I think he might teach in the United States, but he's Australian, who says that when you can't break something down into constituent parts, it must be a fundamental principle. Okay, so from the level of perspective of physics, we can't break electromagnetism down to anything smaller. Therefore, it is a fundamental principle of the universe. It's not made up of anything. Other things are made up of it. Okay?
Hmm.
We haven't been able to break down consciousness into any constituent parts that make consciousness. So there is a movement in philosophy that says, well, then, therefore, consciousness itself is a fundamental principle of the universe, which I find really fascinating because, of course, yogis have essentially been saying this for a long time. That
Hmm.
all is consciousness. Now, how we get from consciousness to like a physical world is like that's another set of huge questions.
I need for us to solve this all right now.
Yeah, right. Well, it's a 1 hour podcast. But but I find this really, really interesting because in some ways, when we chant together, you can see the effects of consciousness, like how we influence one another, um, and it's a kind of call of it, you know. Sometimes I think of it as a performance art project, in which, we will repeat nonsense over and over, faster and faster together, and we'll see what happens. And we can try it with intentionality, or we can try it without it, and let's see what happens. And what happens is you end up feeling better, and you end up feeling connected to other people in this really profound way.
Hmm.
That's what
You were talking about in the longer bio that I'm not sure if it was a bio, but it was like a long statement, about when you first started just sort of creating sounds for yourself. That's something I've been exploring recently. And
Yeah,
when you say that, that's what kind of comes to mind is like, well, maybe it's not the actual words. Maybe it's just the fact that you're making sound and the words give you an excuse to
yeah,
do that.
yeah. But I mean, well, you're a songwriter too. I'll turn this back on you. I mean, when you write a song, where do those words come from?
Yeah, I feel like I'm less scientific. I'm less like questioning about stuff like
Yep.
that. So for me, it's like I channeled it. I
Right. Okay.
it came from eternal source, and I just
Okay.
happened to pick it up, and like it was available,
Yeah.
but I happened to I happened to pick up on it in that moment, I guess.
Well, I mean, my experience isn't different than that. I mean, like I said, I think we're maybe putting different words around the same
Yeah.
unknowable thing. It's like, well, where does a song come from? For people who've never written a piece of music, like it's very difficult to explain it. It's just like it's there.
Hmm.
Or sometimes I have to look. I know a melody just shows up for me, and it just seems obvious in a way, like it just presented itself, and I don't necessarily have a sense of ownership, almost a
Hmm.
feeling like I ran into it and there it was, and
Yeah. Yeah.
recognized. Yeah,
Especially when it's old. Do you find that? Like I
yeah,
look back and I'm like, did I really like I did
yeah.
that?
I know it is a funny thing. You're like, well, I don't. If I created it, I'm not sure how.
Yeah.
It's more like this water's flowing from the well, and you just stick your cup in there, and there it is.
Ooh,
Um,
I like that.
I mean,
Yeah.
I know I had this experience like before I knew anything about ragas. Um, I would write things that particularly chants that had a particular, like there was just a certain thing about the melody that got me, and then I would play it for people who had studied raga, and they were like, oh yeah, that's raga yaman, you know,
Hmm.
or oh, that's Bhairavi. And I'd be like, really, what's that? And they're like, well, these are the rules around it, and I had this feeling like, oh yeah, it felt right, like as if
Yeah.
like there was a natural principle, like some actual fact of the universe I'd run into.
Yeah. There's actually a Bill Bryson book that I started reading. I never finished, but it's about the not the evolution, but like the genesis of language. And it
Uh-huh.
turns out that in most cultures, the sound for mother is very similar. The sound for father is very similar without any sort of migration happening or like, um, any like those sorts of things taken out of it.
Yep.
And it's really interesting. There's just words that sort of like are obvious, I guess.
Yeah, like the sounds are meaningful in a lot of ways. I was for a while explaining a Sanskrit mantra, Om Namah Shivaya, in terms of its constituent sounds. And I've
Mm.
been fortunate to be able to travel all over the world and sing, so I've been able to experiment with this idea in a lot of different countries and a lot of different language groups. And it seems to be true whether we're talking Mandarin or German or Spanish or whatever. But the sound O pretty much is a feeling of openness and wonder,
Mm.
like surprise.
Mm.
The sound is in the word for mother everywhere.
Hmm.
And somewhere, if it's not the beginning, it's in the middle or the end, and it's something really centering about that. Sounds like shh, mean quiet everywhere.
Mm.
If you go it sounds exciting to people. So these constituent sounds of the mantra itself produce like a meaning inherently in every language. So they must be part of the way our brain is organized. And I think the mantras touch on that. And you know, it sounds like you do the same. Like for me, if I'm writing a song in English, it usually doesn't come out in English first. It comes out as a series of sounds that just feel right in
Mm,
certain places.
mm,
And for me, this I'm just about to release a new record called Thrum, which is the first record I've released in English in like 20 years. And
yeah.
before I got hijacked by chanting, which has been an interesting adventure. But I do speak English and I do write in English. But the process of creating those songs is that they were all wordless. Like I sang them in a way in my own invented language, or just how it came
Mm,
out, right? But of course, nobody can sing that back and or interpret it. It's like it's maybe emotionally, uh, it's clear emotionally in terms of that impact, but intellectually, it's unclear. But I would hear like a certain, it just had to go ooh here, or it had to go I there. And eventually some words would come in and it'd be like, okay, there's this word and there's this word and this word. And then at a certain point, I look at all those words and I go, oh, I see what this is about. Like the aboutness came from the sound. And
wow.
and then all of a sudden it was like, okay, wow, I'm writing a song about this. Really? Wow, what's the impact of that? Then I would have to dig in and start to then find the words that filled it in. But the meaning, the subject of the song always arose from the sounds that I was making in the first place. And I had to kind of like interpret them. So, um, in the sense, this sense, maybe we get to the origin of mantra. What I dug about chanting in Sanskrit in India was that, like, I'd already been writing these nonsense songs, but no one could sing with me. But in this case, now we had a nonsense that we could all sing together. And it was like
I love that description. It's
it's
so
like a
funny.
transportive experience. It's like, oh my God, this is like content free. You can say, oh, it's to Shiva or Krishna or Durga or whatever, but never mind. Just sing.
Hmm.
And I which I'm sure maybe some people are offended by that, like for me to say that, but you know, the fact that we could do that and connect in a space that's somehow both beyond meaning, but has its origin in something deep inside our heads is
Hmm.
like, that's really cool to me. And
Yeah. Well, first of all, that is the craziest way of songwriting I've ever heard. That is so cool. I've never heard of anybody songwriting that way. Perhaps that's just my naivete, but that's really cool. I love that.
okay.
Um, but then the other thing is, I'm curious. Well, I just wanted to say that, but I have a question about the kind of the way that you view, I guess, the content of the lyrics. I mean, they do come from a religious context, to my understanding, right? Or at least like a spiritual context with some sort of belief attached to
You
them.
talk about the Sanskrit mantras?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like
For sure. I mean,
yeah.
there's deep layers of philosophy behind that. I mean, if you just to say Shiva is to open an entire world of philosophy, and
But so do you sort of put that aside, or is that just kind of not your framework?
oh no, I dig it. It's like
Okay.
I've metaphorically, I find it rich with poetic meaning. And I love, I mean, I do explain these things to people because you can't just say, hey, let's chant nonsense, because then people will just keep thinking, what does it mean? So you have to say something,
Right, right.
and oh no, there's like so many beautiful stories behind this, and all of it touches deep into uh, very sophisticated philosophy. To chant to Shiva, for example, is to recognize that things are always coming apart and eventually coming back together again. And so you're in effect saying you're honoring the principle of dissolution in the world, that it's the first step into things recreating, that we break things down and then put them back together. You're saying, hey, I'm here now and alive and singing, and I won't always be here and alive and singing. I'm a temporary, like droplet of consciousness here. You can't not reflect on the metaphors. I think they're rich and beautiful. what I'm just saying is that you don't have to know them or know
Mm,
about it in order to have a transportive experience.
mm,
So it allows the chanter to take whatever journey they want to make contextually. You can look at it from a strict like Hindu perspective, and that's available to you.
mhm.
You can take a journey into, say, Kashmir Shaivism or Advaita Vedanta, and you can just dig the sounds. Um, there's a lot of different places that you as a chanter can be, and I feel like I want to allow for all those experiences. There's certainly plenty of people who've been dragged into a chant that I was leading, sort of against their will. It's like, like, yoga girl brings, boyfriend and promises, look, I'll go to the football game with you, but you have to come to the chant, right? And so he's there and he's like, okay, you know, move me,
Yeah, yeah.
and so on some level, I'm purposefully speaking to the skeptical, um, and even trying to honor skepticism as a spiritual path itself. To say these are my resistances, or this is what I don't know, or this is what I'm uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
You know.
Seems like you and Sheila Nichols share that. That when
Oh
I talked to her, that was a big focus for her. I really loved that album Thrum.
yeah, I
Well,
think
I guess you said it's not released yet, but it was in its
on
completed
Bandcamp. It's on
form on
Bandcamp,
Bandcamp.
and
Yeah.
which seems to be, for the elements of the audience here that are unfamiliar with streaming services, Bandcamp actually pays musicians.
Mm,
And I think what's beginning to be more typical is that people are putting things up on Bandcamp so that people who want to support the artists can go there first and download it, and you can get
mm.
all kinds of stuff. Like, for example, you can download a PDF of like all the music to Thrum, including the string charts and arrangements and
Yeah,
everything.
that's really cool. I noticed that.
Yeah,
That's really
like I'm like,
cool.
okay, you want to hire a string quartet and play rhythm? Well, like, go for it. It's but I mean, that record started originally. I mean, Sheila and I go way, way back. When I first started making mantra records in the early 2000s, I started asking people that didn't really know anything about this to sing with me. I found that professional musicians um, were able to help me realize this from an art perspective in ways that devotional musicians were not as skillful.
Mm.
And so my first chant records, Japa and Mala, I asked people like Donna Delory and Cece White and Sheila Nichols,
Who
to,
are all mantra artists
who are all
now.
mantra artists now. They were like, I remember Cece was like, "What's this Sanskrit?" Like, just sing it. And the thing is, it proves my point. Okay, it's like you start singing it, and there's something so fantastic about it that you just want to go deeper. And I'm really like thrilled and humbled that some of these people that I asked, to sing on my first records, that I knew from really a kind of a Hollywood music scene, like were so moved by it that they became themselves artists and, went of it and took a deep voyage in it, Um, so Sheila and I, sang together a little bit back then, and then we kind of got lost. She had a big record deal with Disney and went off on a whole journey with that. And I was, rocking the yoga studios, from the back of the minivan. And somehow, she was on the Tonight Show and I was, at the mini mall. So it just, but then she showed up at Bhakti Fest a few years ago, and back, well, not more than a few years ago now, but I got a text from her saying, hey, your phone number is still the same, and I'm in the audience. And I was like, well, what are you doing here? Um, anyway, it led to me co-producing her record, All of Nature, and she had morphed from a sort of fight the power political singer into a deeply a, a deep place of spiritual inquiry, and
Mm.
so that record was a place that we could meet, and our conversation, just went from there. And so when I started making Thrum, it just seemed natural to do it with her because we have a
Mm.
particular vocal chemistry
Hmm.
and and some of the same questions.
Your voices sound really great together,
Yeah,
in my humble opinion.
thank you.
So are you working quite a bit now as producer on?
Mostly when the
Yeah.
pandemic hit, I mean, I'm sure you and, so many people that we know, like that was suddenly like in 1 week, the whole world shattered. It was like
Hmm.
an entire year's worth of tour dates went
Did
down.
you had a whole tour planned? Yeah.
Oh my God, yeah, like all over the world, and it
Wow.
just like done. And you know, I was fortunate that I had agreed to produce some tracks for some other artists, and I wasn't sure how I was going to actually do that given my tour schedule, and the pandemic
Voila.
problem for me. And um, so I just turned my attention to that, and I realized that in all these years that I'd been touring, what I wasn't doing was creating new music. It had been years since I'd released a new record, and suddenly I had all this time on my hands, and a studio, and I just started recording. And I think since the pandemic started, I think I probably produced like 50 pieces of music.
Wow.
Yeah.
And is that something that you did before producing? I mean, I guess you did for Sheila. That's a silly question, but like, is that something you kind of evolved to become, or did you have a background in that?
Well, I mean, I produced my own stuff mostly,
Mm.
and uh, I mean, I've always actually worked with somebody, an engineer, or somebody who could say no to me, or somebody who could say, "Hey, that's not working for me," or "You want to think about it from this perspective." But I know how to engineer stuff, and but and so I learned quite a lot about the process. The first record I actually ever produced for another artist was an album called Bhakti Without Borders that I produced
Mm.
for a guy named Madi Das, um, in 2015. And funnily enough, it was his first album, and it was the first album I ever produced. And we ended up getting nominated for a Grammy for it, which was like, what? You know? Um, and But I mean, that opened a few doors, and it was surprising to me too. I mean, I guess we were recording it largely in 2014 and 15, and I'd been in Bali and Australia on tour, and there was a volcano eruption on Lombok, the neighboring island to Bali. I'd been at the Bali Spirit Festival, and I had a big tour in Australia planned following it, and the volcano eruption closed the airspace over Bali, and I couldn't leave. And so I was stuck there for 2 weeks. And, it's paradise until you can't get out, in which case, you know, uh, and what was happening is that tour date after tour date was having to be rescheduled in Australia.
Mm.
And one venue, like we'd sold 500 tickets to a show in Sydney and we couldn't get the venue back, and we had to refund all this
Mm.
money, and, and reschedule it and change airplane tickets. It basically, a tour that I would have come home with a nice chunk of change from broke even.
Uh,
And it was really painful and something I never could have predicted. I mean, who thinks a volcano
right.
eruption is going to like destroy your tour? Anyway, I just remember being in the middle of the Pacific in the middle of the night, flying back to Los Angeles from Sydney, and just going, I tried. I did my best, really, but this isn't working, and I can give this up now. I can just say, nobody could guarantee me or any musician of success, but I've had a beautiful ride around the world doing something just magical and wonderful, and I've seen so much of the world and seen how good and kind so many people can be, and things are random, and this is fucked up, and I'm tired,
So,
and
like, in your mind, this was the end of your touring career?
yeah, that was the end. And I
Oh.
was like, okay, that's it. I give up. It's just too much effort. So we land in LA. I turn on my phone and it blows up with messages. Congratulations on your Grammy nomination. And I'm like, oh, I guess it's not over, you know? And so things are produced, come from there. And I mean, I have a nice credit in my bio, and I don't know what it means exactly other than the fact that I got lucky and that it's a beautiful record and that somehow the universe says, do that, you know?
Well, when you get nominated for a Grammy, though, that's actually cooler. I mean, okay, this is a loaded comment, but it's actually your peers voting you in, right? That's a pretty cool honor because the actual winner of the Grammy is not necessarily, it's not so heavily weighted by, that's how I understand it anyway. You correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I mean, there's a lot of political processes involved in it, and now I've become much more involved in it because one of the
Hmm.
things that I found out and that Madi found out is that we were nominated in this category called New Age, which I don't really like that term. I don't mean to offend anybody who does, but it doesn't identify. It doesn't name the music I do or the music you do or the music that a
Right.
lot of our peers do. And I realized that they had to put some place that mantra music went. But the people who vote for these things, they're not interested in mantra music. They're interested in, you know, this thing they call New Age. And
Right.
so we started a process of trying to get chant recognized as a category, and which we failed at first, and then got it together to make a second run at.
Were you trying in the beginning to have it be an entirely different category
Yeah,
or to amend the New Age category?
no, we wanted a separate category for
Yeah.
chant, but there's politics, and there's only, you know, sometimes you have to accept half of what you want, in order to get anything at all.
Yeah.
The New Age people pushed back really hard, but and so we failed the first time. And there were a bunch of people involved, Sean Johnson, Michael Starita, a bunch of people, writing proposals. And but the thing is, what came in the back channels is like, well, actually, you guys are a community, and we recognize there's a validity to what you're
Mm.
asking for here, but you have to get it together. Like you need to organize your community, and make the case for it. So we did that, and this year they agreed to add chant to New Age and also include ambient, because those people who were making ambient
Mm.
meditative music also felt that what they were doing wasn't New Age. So the fact that there was another group that was also seeking to be recognized, they put it all in a hybrid category.
Mm.
And that was the best we could do, and but at least it's recognized,
Hmm.
like chant is a thing. And my hope is that it can be expanded beyond the Sanskrit, beyond Gurmukhi, beyond, like the kind of yoga world of it, to include
Mm.
everything from like ayahuasca chants to Yoruba chants to Hebrew chants.
Mm. Hmm.
There's a world of vocal music that has a transcendental intention or a consciousness shifting
Hmm.
intention, I think.
Is that where you would kind of draw the distinction between quote unquote world music, which is also a category, I think, right? And the New Age chant ambient is kind of the intention behind it?
I think so, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, chant is, well, also chant is specifically vocal music. And,
Mm. Mm.
but it does, in all the ways it's practiced, generally have the intention of shifting people's awareness in certain ways. It has, however you want to frame it, a spiritual impact. And people debate a lot about these words, spiritual music. There were people trying to say, well, let's call it spiritual, but then that presumed that, like, jazz is not spiritual,
Hmm.
like, and so, yeah,
That also tends to be, I hear that word more in like the Christian sense, which is very different from
yeah,
like mantra chant.
yeah. But I mean, part of our push too was like, well, hey, like there's like 5 or 7 different categories of Christian music, and it's
Is there really? I
it's like
didn't know that.
God, yeah. And it's like, well, there's a whole world here of devotional practices, and I mean, I'm
Yeah,
not discrediting Christian music. It's like I mean, you can be moved by music that you don't know anything about its spiritual intent. Like I'm not a Sufi, but
right.
when I listen to Kawali, I'm like transported, you know? I'm not a Christian exactly, or was. I guess I'm not really anymore, but I've kind of integrated that into yoga in its way. But I can listen to Hildegard von Bingen or Gregorian chant and be moved by it.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
so
Are the categories for Christian like pop Christian, country Christian? Is that how they kind of
yeah, there's different. There's
do it?
contemporary Christian. There's
Contemporary.
gospel. Yeah,
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
I mean they
Yeah, I
shuffle
guess I
them
see
from
that.
yeah
What's that?
they shuffle them from year to year. Like
Mm.
the inner
Oh,
category.
really? I didn't realize
Yeah,
that.
they're always trying to play. I mean, the Grammys are a business, and
Hmm.
they're trying to um, adjust their categories to, partly meet popular interest.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, that kind of brings us to the next part of the project because you guys didn't start or stop at this Grammy category, right? You ended up forming kind of a coalition to
The Oracle Collective.
amplify. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Well, yeah, it started there and it kept on going. And we realized, I mean, with the pandemic still raging, this would have been back somewhere in 21 when we started this, that we needed our community. As an artist, uh, I realized my work doesn't really mean anything without. I mean, it means that the process of creation is meaningful to me personally, but it's amplified and given dimension by an audience, and chanting particularly because people are singing along with us. They're part of the band. Like or it's like you go and chant and you're like, I got a huge choir. Um, and 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 I missed uh, the connection to the other artists that you'd see people at festivals and things like this. There's a community that worldwide is really connected in beautiful ways. And I realized that we weren't making any money from the streaming services, that we weren't playing any shows, we couldn't sell CDs anymore because no one buys them, because no one can play them, and that we're making music, but we can't, and spending all our time doing it, and there aren't any record companies really serving us.
Hmm. Hmm.
But it occurred to me that as a community, that we were already connected, and that if we could work together to advance our own interests, that maybe we could do something revolutionary.
Mm.
Um, and that ranges even from engaging in social action together, um, but more than that, to um, find ways that we could function as like mirrors or amplifiers for one another, that by paying attention to each other's work, we could help
Hmm.
promote it,
Hmm.
that we could hire people to serve us, like as in like hire publicists or licensing people. Like effectively, we're the record company, all of
Mm.
us. And
Is that how you see the Oracle Collective or how it might develop is actually into a record company?
in a wholly different way.
Mm.
Um, Basically, anybody, we can all get our music out to the streaming services. I mean, we do need to be able to negotiate, use our collective power to negotiate in terms of everything from better contracts with festivals, how and
Mm.
when we get paid. That's a little bit more of like a labor union kind of thing, but there is power in the collective in this way. Um, to the extent that we can affect the streaming services, well, at least organizing together to get chant recognized means it's searchable now. Um, uh,
It's not a category on Spotify.
no, but it
It's
will be
not.
soon,
Oh, yeah.
because this is the first year that we just closed the nominating period with the Grammys. This will be the first year that they actually have nominees and winners in New Age ambient chant.
Mm.
So once that happens, it will be searchable.
Mm.
But the question is, what do we do together here? I don't think at this point, like record companies traditionally put up money to finance projects and then they owned some percentage of the intellectual property.
Mm-hmm.
That's not necessary anymore. Anybody can put their stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that a musician's collective needs to get involved on that level financially. I think it's more like make services available, use economies of scale. For example, if 5 different artists are releasing records in May, then it should be possible to have a publicist who knows about this, and that you could say, all right, well, gang all this stuff together,
Mm.
put the publicity together. But we can also address a single audience, that can know when people are releasing new things. So we can
Mm.
point our audience all in one place.
Mm.
We can also get our audience to help finance the operation. It's turned out that people do want to make contributions to support artists, but they need to know how to do it and what's effective. I think where this may be going is toward a kind of app where you can buy tickets to everybody's concerts, where you can subscribe to it and as an audience member be able to find local kirtans anywhere in the world, buy tickets, find out about new releases, and even directly support artists. In the big picture, it may be that using NFTs may allow us to create even a kind of investment fund so that artists can create new work, and somebody might invest in the fund itself. Like think of it as like a mutual fund for record production. Instead of
Mm.
investing in my album or your album, you're investing in the community's work
Mm.
and potentially getting a return on that investment as an audience member. There's a lot of ideas floating in the air right now, and what we're trying to do right now is practice the art of the possible, which is to say that we said we get chant as a category recognized. We did. The next thing was to get everybody to work together, no small feat, to focus our audience's attention on our Spotify plays and to get more people to follow us. And that was effective, especially at sort of the mid-level, and for people who didn't have a lot of followers, they now have significantly more followers.
Mm-hmm.
If you're somebody who already had hundreds of thousands of followers, your percentage increase was smaller. But the idea is that we stimulated the algorithm of Spotify to start more frequently recommending our music and cross-recommending it to our audience. So we're going to keep doing those things we want to try it on YouTube, on Apple Music, on other
Mm.
services.
And just to because you haven't explained yet, and I'm thinking maybe somebody listening to it might not know what you're talking about because we
Yeah.
haven't actually talked about the app.
Oh, the app, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We created a piece of software that allows you with a single click to follow 108. That wasn't, I know it's a special number, but it wasn't intentional. It just worked out that
Really?
way.
That's cool.
Yeah, yeah. 108 artists all at once. So by doing that, it tells Spotify recommends music by algorithm. It sees what people are searching for. It sees what artists people are searching for. So we created a surge of people searching for artists who had related music. The first step is all the artists followed each other, thus
Mm.
creating an inner web of connections between a certain group of artists. Then when audience members follow any of those artists or all of those artists, it creates another algorithm on top of it, which Spotify's algorithm sees as like, oh, there's interest in music of this type.
Right.
and that means it starts recommending it more. So the idea was to, jack the algorithm to like go, well, this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a kind of artificial intelligence deciding what kind of music is going to get recommended to who. And instead of just floating along, we decided to try and uh, take charge of it in a way as a community. Just say, well,
Mm.
okay, we're here, we know each other, we have the capacity to work together. Um, my hope is that if as we're able to do more of these things, um, that other communities of musicians who don't address like a mass pop audience, like think bluegrass or jazz or
Mm-hmm.
things like this, would also be able to organize
Mm-hmm.
in ways that are more self-supporting.
Mm-hmm.
That's the goal here, but it's like one step at a time of like what can we do that's next effective.
Mm.
So um, those are things that we're trying to identify right now. Um, in the wake of the first experiment, we now have upwards of 60 more artists who want to join us. And we have a little bit of a problem of like, well, what to do next? We've got everybody's interest,
Mm-hmm.
and clearly we can do things acting together. The question is, what's the next thing to do that will advance our economic interests, that will create more plays and create more interest in the music that we're making?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, YouTube is interesting. It doesn't get as much like flack, I guess, but in terms of music, YouTube pays a fraction of even what Spotify plays, which
The
is
worst.
but nobody talks about that. I love YouTube though. Like I
Yeah,
think it's a fantastic
right.
app. I use it daily. I don't
Sure.
use it necessarily to listen to music, but I would be interested to know what could be
Appar-
done.
Apparently, more people actually use YouTube to listen to music than anything.
Yeah, that's crazy to me.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I'm kind of, I'm more and more involved with the Grammys now. I just got asked to be on some committee there that had to do with nominations and stuff. And what interests me there is there's a political lobbying aspect of the Recording Academy.
Hmm.
Um, the world of software is out in front of the law again and again. Um, and they keep using the fact that laws don't exist about certain kinds of royalties to basically just decide what they're going to pay people. And it's a very
Hmm.
weird thing. Like in most forms of capitalism, you have a product and they say, how much did it cost you to make it? And you say this, and then you negotiate some percentage on top of that, and that is a profit. And then the market kind of price goes up and down or whatever. But music isn't that way.
Yeah,
Like the companies told us what they were going to pay for music. It has no relationship to the cost of making a record.
right.
I mean, when we could sell physical CDs, you could recoup the cost of making that CD, in the course of touring and, in the space of a year or so, or
Sure.
less, depending.
Yeah.
Now you don't have any hope. I mean, when, a million plays gets you $800, like, it's a little confounding, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so this is requiring lobbying on a political level. Um, at the risk of, boring an audience here, there's a bunch of different ways that musicians make money from music. Part of it has to do with the intellectual property, like who wrote the song, ownership of the master, like who paid for the recording. And then often there's a royalty that goes to like who the artist is.
Mm.
Um, the royalty laws in America were codified in the 1930s and 40s when most music was either sold via LPs or broadcast radio.
Mm.
And those laws of royalties only apply in those places. So even though we get our music on our phones over the airwaves, that's
Hmm.
not seen as broadcast radio.
Mm.
So if your music's played by a traditional radio station, you get traditional royalties. If your music's played over Wi-Fi, you get no royalties. And there's no laws that tell the streaming services how much royalties they have to pay, which is why they all pay different.
Right, right. Well, and
So,
it's global too, which makes it, I mean, you can't Spotify exists in Sweden. I don't even know what that would look like in I mean, the American government can't tell a
right,
Swedish company what to pay their
right,
artists, right?
right. They're taking advantage of the fact that it's transnational, but the fact is that they're making money from stuff from material that you and I are paying to create, or many artists are paying to create, and they're not paying us what it costs to create it. They're making money out of the fact that we want to be heard,
Right.
and there's a deep inequity to that, and it poses some serious questions about the future of the music industry and how this is going to work. So the Oracle Collective, to kind of land the plane here, is an attempt to create a unity, a space of mutual support between a community of artists and the people who are moved by the artist's music. I think that our worldwide base of fans understands the importance of the music that we make in terms of their lives, values it enough that they are willing to, in some ways, support directly the artists. And we're trying to create some mechanisms by which that can occur. And it might be that you subscribe to an app and you pay a monthly fee, and
Mm.
some of that is distributed directly to the artists, or it pays for services that the artist can access. Um, I'd almost like to try and create a kind of like frequent flyer program for chant, you know.
How does that work?
Well, it's like, hey, if you just like if you take a bunch of flights and you get
Hmm.
miles, and then you
Okay.
get a free flight, like maybe you go to 12 kirtans in the course of a year, and that would give you then free concert tickets,
Oh, I like that.
might or it might give you access. There might be other benefits. Like as somebody who contributes a lot, it might translate into, just like if you have gold or platinum status, you get to board the plane first. You might just have a pass that when you go to the concert, they let the gold people in first. You get better
That's
seat.
really cool.
Yeah,
Maybe they get like a VIP treatment too. They get to
yeah, sure.
get a little meet and greet with the artist, or
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly. Because this is a really personal thing. I like talking to the people that come there. I mean, they're just 100% beautiful, interesting people, and I I like to talk to people, but it can get a little overwhelming. So
hmm,
sure, if there's have a cup of tea with the artist after the show kind of a thing, I'd be down with that. You
yeah,
know. But the idea is to do it across a group of artists, so that you could see anybody's show, and and then get your free ticket to whoever as well. So there's a lot of questions about how this all would work, but it's all about trying to unite a community, and get the community and the artists in a mutually supportive relationship.
hmm. Oh, well, that's awesome. Bravo to you, and to all the
Well,
people who are part of that project. It's
yeah,
not
well,
just you,
you're
yeah.
part of that project,
Yeah.
so
Oh, well, but I mean, I don't feel like I've been instrumental in terms of action besides sharing the app, but I,
well, no, I appreciate that. And the thing is, look, I understand people are going to step forward as they're able, and really, what we need as a group of artists is a standing like staff, a group of people that are in an office that we can access. And you might not need them all the time,
mhm.
but if you are actively touring and promoting new work, you would probably want to have access to publicists. um, there's also back end things like One thing that does pay artists is licensing. Like if you get a song in a movie or in some advertising or something like that, that still pays. And so to have somebody who works for the whole group, knows everybody's music and can like pitch that to film studios would be very useful. I know it sounds wacky, but like I sang Asatoma Sadgamaya on the tail credits of one of those Matrix movies, and I still get,
Did you really?
yeah,
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
yeah, I still get royalties from it. I mean, it's like sometimes it's like $6.78, but it's still, I mean, it seems like, oh, Sanskrit mantras would have no commercial value, but that's not at all true.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. And
Wow.
yeah, especially, for those of us who are also writing songs in English, I think that there is a potentially massive market for spiritual singer-songwriters that aren't like Christian singer-songwriters.
There's another category.
Working on
Yeah.
it. Working on it.
Oh, so awesome.
But I mean, I know that you write things in that realm too. So
Yeah.
it's it's not exactly a side project. It's just, it's another aspect of what we do as artists.
Yeah.
And potentially a larger group of people to address.
Awesome. Well, on that note, thank you so much for doing this. And
Yeah.
can you share how people can stay in touch with you, how they can find out about all of your projects and releases and stuff like that?
Sure. Well, we were discussing the Oracle Collective. That's AURICLE Collective. .com is how you can find out about all these artists. Oracle, in this case, represents both the opening to the ear, and it's also the chamber of the heart that lets the freshly oxygenated blood flow in. And of course, it's a homonym for Oracle, as in like consult the. But so you can find out about a whole community and what they're doing there, and we're developing that website and an app, etc. You can go to davestringer.com and you can find your way to all sorts of things that I'm doing, including things like look at a neuroscience research proposal about how we influence each other as we chant. You can go to my Bandcamp page, also Dave Stringer, and find Thrum, my new chant record in progress called Glider, and my latest collaboration with Madi Das, whose first record I produced for the Grammy nomination. The next one is called Mantra Americana, and the first 5 songs are out on Spotify and also on Bandcamp. We are playing around in a pool where mantra music has become something authentically like, it's world folk music. It has an origin in the Indian subcontinent, but it's become much more than that. And the mighty river that's absorbed a lot of different influences. Personally, I hear a connection between American country and bluegrass and Indian ragas. And if you can think of country music as played by harmoniums and tablas, and with various different kinds of twang included, call it country and Eastern music. That's kind of what I've been up to lately. And so you can check all those things out. Sheila Nichols, Nichols, is a very fine songwriter, and our collaboration Thrum is available, but you can also check out her albums. All of Nature is the one that I co-produced, and it's really, really good. So
awesome. Well, thank you very much, Dave. This was really delightful.
Yeah.
And I will see y'all in the next episode. Bye.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thank you for tuning into the podcast. Please remember to like, rate, subscribe, whatever your service offers you as a way to engage and let others know that you're enjoying it so it gets shared with more people. For all news updates on what I am doing, you can go to my website, portersinger.com, sign up for my mailing list, and get a free track as a thank you. All right, I will see you in the next episode. Bye.